really attacked that park ranger in the dead of night, and why are officials so desperate to keep it quiet? The incident report was buried, witnesses were silenced, and even the ranger himself seems to have vanished without a trace. Something stalks the forest that isn't supposed to exist. Park rangers, those guardians of our wild spaces, see things they can't explain. Most stay quiet, bound by unwritten rules and unnamed fears, but sometimes a story breaks through the silence, a story so terrifying it threatens to expose everything they've tried to hide. Tonight, we're going to uncover what really happened on that pitch black night and why some secrets are kept hidden, even when the cost is measured in blood. The truth about what's really hunting in our national parks might just change everything you thought you knew about the wilderness.
Secrets of the woods.
I've been following your site for a while, and I never thought I'd be the one writing in. But after what happened to me a few weeks ago at Chadron State Park in northwestern Nebraska, I feel like I've got no choice. I'm not even supposed to talk about this. I was specifically warned not to, but the way it all went down has been eating at me ever since, and I guess I just need to get it off my chest. I should start by explaining why I even had a body cam on in the first place. A few months back, the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, my employer, launched a pilot program to test body cams for park rangers. Mostly, it's a reaction to the uptick in missing hiker reports and suspicious activity out here in the Pine Ridge area. Folks have been complaining about illegal hunting, strange howls at night, and even talk of spirit animals roaming deeper in the forest. I think the commission saw it as a way to protect us from liability if anything ever happened during our patrols. I didn't mind wearing it. It gave me some peace of mind, especially given the weird chatter that's been going around. Anyway, on the night in question, August 22nd to be specific, I was doing a late patrol around the Northern Trail Loop. It was about 11:30 p.m. when I heard something that turned my stomach, a low guttural growl coming from the dense tree line near the old footbridge. I initially thought it might be a mountain lion because we do get them out here occasionally, but the pitch was wrong, almost too deep. It sounded more canine, but bigger than any wolf or coyote I've ever encountered. I should mention that I've been a park ranger going on 14 years, so I'm pretty good at identifying local wildlife by sound. This was different, like if a wolf had somehow learned to growl and speak at the same time. Sorry if that sounds ridiculous, but that's the only way I can describe it. My hackles went right up. My body cam was rolling the entire time because we're instructed to keep it on once dusk falls. Apparently that's when most incidents occur, though I never expected anything like what happened next. I walked closer to the tree line, shining my flashlight around, calling out something like, "If anyone's out there, you need to clear the area. Park's closed after dark." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blur of movement. It was tall, hunched over in a way that made me think of a person wearing some weird costume, like those Hollywood werewolf get-ups. But this was no costume. The moment I pivoted my flashlight in that direction, I saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at me. They were a sickly yellow-green, and the face, well, it looked canine but elongated, almost like a wolf's muzzle on a man's body. In that split second, I thought, this can't be real. Then it lunged. I swear it moved faster than anything I've ever seen in these woods, faster than a deer or a bobcat on the run. It crossed maybe 15 feet in the blink of an eye. All I remember is stumbling backward, yelling something incoherent, and feeling this incredible weight crash into me. It slammed me to the ground, knocking the wind right out of my lungs. I got a glimpse of its teeth, longer than any normal canine, almost like fangs, and its breath was unbelievably foul, like rotten meat. I'm not proud of how I reacted, but I'm alive, so maybe it was the right call. I panicked and swung my flashlight at its head. The lens cracked on impact, but it must have surprised it enough because it recoiled, giving me just enough time to scramble onto my feet. I heard it snarling behind me, and for a moment, I thought I was done for. Then my training kicked in. I grabbed the small canister of pepper spray from my belt and blindly sprayed behind me in a wide arc. That momentary defense bought me another second or two. I didn't wait around to see if it worked. I ran toward the park's maintenance shed, which was maybe 50 yards away. I could hear it barreling through the brush behind me, snapping branches. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would burst. The only thing I remember thinking was, if I trip or slow down, I'm gone. Somehow, I made it to the shed, slammed the door shut, and slid the bolt. I heard scratching and heavy thumps against the door, like it was trying to bash it down. I was convinced the door wouldn't hold. It's just an old wooden door with a flimsy bolt. But eventually, the thumping stopped. I could still hear it pacing around outside, snorting and growling like some enraged beast. After what felt like forever, it wandered off, though I didn't risk peeking out the window for another 15 minutes or so. When I finally did, all was quiet. I slowly opened the door and crept back to my truck. My uniform was torn at the shoulder, but I realized I wasn't seriously injured, aside from a few deep scratches on my arms where it had grappled me. The body cam was still attached to my vest, though the lens was cracked too. I was half in shock, but still lucid enough to think, I have this on film. The next morning, I contacted my immediate supervisor and told him I'd been attacked by a large, unidentified canine. Didn't go into specifics, just said it was bigger than a wolf, looked half human. I'll never forget the expression on his face. He was worried for sure, but also guarded. He asked me to turn in my body cam footage along with a typed incident report. We follow standard protocols after any wildlife incident, let alone an attack on staff. Within 24 hours, everything went nuts. A handful of military vehicles, couldn't tell if they were National Guard or something else, rolled into the park. They set up a makeshift command post near the ranger station. They asked me, well, it was more like an order, not to discuss the details of the incident with anyone, not even my family. They took my body cam and the incident report, and I was told it was being sent up the chain for review. I kept asking about the film if I'd get it back. They just brushed me off, saying it was classified now. Classified over a wildlife attack? It made no sense. Over the following days, the park was closed for maintenance. They told the public it was due to concerns about a potential rabies outbreak in local wildlife. By the end of the week, the area where I was attacked had been completely cordoned off with yellow tape, and there were official danger wildlife signs everywhere. I overheard a conversation between two men in uniform. They were speculating if it was a breeding pair or just a lone subject. No clue what they meant exactly, but they were definitely not talking about a normal wolf. Then, just as quickly as they arrived, they were gone. The official stance was that they found no evidence of a rabies threat, so the park partially reopened. My supervisor gave me a firm directive: do not bring up the details of this event. I was told, this is for your own safety, as well as public safety. We don't want misinformation to spread. That's paraphrased, but you get the idea. Here's the thing, rumors have been swirling for years about strange, cult-like gatherings around the Pine Ridge region. I've personally never seen any evidence of rituals or anything like that, but I've heard whispers about a group that supposedly practices shape-shifting ceremonies. I always wrote it off as local folklore, like the talk you hear about skinwalkers in the Southwest. But after seeing what I saw, well, let's just say I'm no longer so quick to dismiss the possibility. I'm not saying for sure that's what I encountered, but it sure wasn't any ordinary wolf. A local buddy of mine, who's also a ranger but works in a different district, mentioned he heard there might be a cult behind it, and that some ex-military guys were involved. I have no idea how accurate that is. People love to embellish, especially in small-town circles. But in light of my experience, nothing seems too far-fetched anymore. Part of me wonders if the beast I encountered was a known threat, and that's why the military presence was so immediate. It's not normal for them to show up in such force over a single wildlife incident, no matter how serious. And why confiscate my body cam footage? If this was just a rabid animal, you'd think they'd want the footage as proof for public safety campaigns, not bury it. I'm healing up fine, physically speaking, though I still have nightmares about those eyes. I keep waking up in a sweat, convinced I can hear it sniffing around outside my house. Probably just my nerves. And let's face it, I live near the woods, so any random coyote yips sends my adrenaline spiking, but I don't think I'll ever feel completely at ease out here again. I'm not trying to sensationalize or scare folks away from visiting the parks. There's a chance this was a one-off encounter with some extremely rare or mutated animal, but there's also a chance it's something else entirely. And judging by the military's swift response and secrecy, maybe they know more than they're letting on. Back in '92, I was 24, working for a small security outfit called Hawthorne Protective Services. It was just me and 5 other guys who got assigned to different local sites, warehouses, office buildings, and sometimes the odd remote facility. The pay wasn't great, but there was a certain quiet dignity in being a night watchman, or so I thought at the time. I liked the isolation. Plus, the schedule allowed me to take a few community college courses during the day. Anyway, on August 14th, 1992, and I recall the exact date and time for reasons I'll get to, I was posted at a half-finished corporate park near Bellevue, Nebraska, off Highway 370. Construction had stalled because the developers ran out of money. This was right around the time the economy was in a bit of a slump, if you remember. So basically, I just roam around a nearly abandoned 40-acre site with only skeletal building frames and giant concrete slabs at various stages of completion. It was boring most nights. I'd get there around 10 p.m., do my rounds, sit in my car, read a paperback novel, or occasionally pop a cassette into the tape deck. If you remember cassettes, that definitely pins the era. But let me tell you, that night was anything but dull. I started my patrol just after 10:30 p.m., walking the perimeter to make sure no kids were sneaking in to skateboard or do whatever kids do at night. I remember how still it was. No wind, no chirping of crickets, none of that typical August nighttime ambiance. It was eerie, like the whole world was holding its breath. I got this unsettling feeling in my stomach, almost like I was anticipating something. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination. By the time I circled back to my car, it was precisely 11:12 p.m. I remember checking my watch. I like to keep track of exact times for the security logs, so it was habit to glance at it. I was about to write something trivial in my log, like all clear, no trespassers, perimeter secure, when I caught a glimpse of something glowing off to the south near the unfinished steel framework of what was supposed to be the park's main building. I'm not talking about headlights or the usual glow from city lights reflecting off the clouds. This was a bright, almost bluish light, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. It seemed to hover or flicker like a weird silent strobe. A part of me thought it might be an electrical short in the temporary floodlights installed at the site, so I went to investigate. As I approached, I realized something felt off. The air was heavier and my ears were ringing, the way they sometimes do when a loud sound is about to happen, except it was dead silent. The hair on my arms stood on end. I kept telling myself to stay calm. It's probably just a busted transformer or a flickering floodlight, I remember thinking. But if that were the case, there would have been a distinct buzzing sound, maybe the smell of burning plastic or ozone. There was none of that. Instead, the night seemed to have swallowed every other noise around me. I got to within maybe 40 or 50 yards of this steel skeleton of a building when I noticed a faint glow on the ground itself, almost like it was being illuminated from underneath. It reminded me of the effect you see when someone puts a flashlight under their chin while telling a ghost story. It was shining from below, through what I thought were cracks in the cement foundation. Except the foundation wasn't cracked, at least not that I'd ever observed on my earlier patrols. This was new, or maybe I'd just never been there at exactly this time of night to see it. I knelt down, trying to see if maybe they installed some kind of bizarre lighting feature, but that was beyond unlikely. The project was bankrupt and everything was on hold. All of a sudden, that bluish light pulsed, kind of a slow throb, if that makes sense, and the next thing I know, the entire building frame seemed to resonate, like a low hum in the metal. I couldn't believe my eyes. The steel girders looked like they were shifting, not physically moving, but shimmering, almost as if I was looking at them through the world's biggest heat mirage. I had this crazy urge to touch one of the beams, but something in my gut said, "Don't get any closer." I started stepping backward, my eyes still locked on that pulsing glow, when I sensed movement to my left. It was just a flicker of motion, and I never got a clear look at it, but I remember thinking it was tall. Taller than me at least, and I'm 6 feet. My mind flashed to 1,000 possibilities. Could it be a trespasser, a stray dog, or something else? But none of those made sense in the context of that flickering bluish light. Then, out of nowhere, I recall hearing an almost imperceptible voice in my head, like an internal radio transmission. I wish I had a better way to describe it. It wasn't a voice I recognized, and it certainly wasn't my own thoughts. It was more like an impression or a wordless nudge. The best way I can describe it, something was warning me, telling me to leave, The feeling was so overwhelming that I nearly bolted. I tried to keep my composure, checked my watch again, and it still showed 11:12 p.m. That's when I realized my watch had stopped. Now I know a digital watch can freeze if the battery is dying, but the timing freaked me out. It had always been reliable. Maybe it was coincidence, but in that moment, it felt like time itself had been suspended around me. I hurried back to my car, and I tried the radio to call the guard at our sister site. Nothing but static. The lights on the dash were dimming too. I remember cursing under my breath. I just replaced that battery less than 2 months prior. Feeling increasingly unsettled, I flipped on the ignition. The engine struggled, but eventually started. Then, in a flash, the site was dark again. The weird blue glow vanished, and the floodlights near the skeleton building resumed their normal pale yellow hue, flickering a bit as they always did when running on generator power. It's the strangest thing. Once that glow disappeared, the entire environment felt different, like a weight had been lifted. The crickets started chirping again, and I could hear the distant sound of a train in the background. My watch jumped to 11:21 p.m., but it skipped the entire interim. Just jumped ahead like it had caught up to real time. My best guess is maybe I lost about 9 or 10 minutes there, though I can't be certain. I sat in my car with the doors locked, headlights on, scanning every corner of that vacant lot. I was half expecting to see a group of kids playing a prank, but there was no sign of anyone. I didn't see that tall shape again either. I did a quick drive around the perimeter just to be sure, but it was all empty. By midnight, everything seemed normal again. No flickering lights, no hum, no pulsating glow. I felt completely drained, like I'd run a marathon without moving an inch. The next day, I tried explaining what happened to my supervisor, a gruff, no-nonsense ex-cop. He basically said, "You probably dozed off and dreamed it, only in more colorful language." I told him about my watch stopping and the battery glitch in my car. He shrugged and said electronics fail sometimes, especially in older vehicles. I also mentioned the possibility of an electromagnetic issue from the generator or some kind of experimental tech. There was a rumor that the building might be leased by a defense contractor eventually, but he just rolled his eyes. The thing is, I submitted an incident report, as I was required to do, detailing the times, the malfunctioning equipment, and that strange illumination. They never filed it in the usual binder. I went looking for it a few weeks later, and it was gone. My guess is they didn't want the client to think their night guard was seeing UFOs or having X-Files episodes. That was the era right before the X-Files actually premiered on TV. So ironically, I didn't even have that cultural reference at the time. But that's exactly how it felt, like I'd stumbled onto something beyond normal explanation. Over the years, I've tried rationalizing it. Maybe there was a secret underground facility, or maybe local kids had rigged some elaborate lighting setup, but in my gut, none of that squares with what I experienced. The weird time gap on my watch, the sense of presence telling me to leave, the entire environment going silent. Those are details you don't just forget. My name is Greg, I'm 39, I live just outside of Fremont, Nebraska, and I work over at the North Fremont Wastewater Treatment Facility. I should probably mention that I've worked there for close to 10 years now, so I'm about as familiar with the place as anyone can be. You get used to the smells, the routine hum of the machinery, and the random wildlife that scuttles around the perimeter after dark, raccoons, possums, and yes, even stray cats. Whatever I've been hearing lately is not normal. It started around late October, right after we had that big temperature drop. Might have been the night of October 26th or 27th, because I remember it was the same week as our annual facility audit. We'd been dealing with some supply chain issues, filters not arriving on time, some backorder nonsense, and I recall feeling extra stressed because I had to juggle my normal graveyard shift with ensuring all the paperwork was in order for the inspection. I work nights a lot, usually from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., though it shifts sometimes depending on staffing. In any case, it was around midnight when I first heard this weird echoing cry. It was faint, like an animal in distress, but not quite. At first, I assumed maybe a fox or a coyote was injured on the property's outskirts. I even radioed one of my coworkers who was doing a check of the secondary clarifiers and mentioned, "Something's making a racket out there." He responded that it sounded more like an owl or a hawk to him, but, at that distance, it was hard to be sure. Fine. I shrugged it off. We have big hawks around here and they do screech. But then the noises continued, almost rhythmic, getting longer and deeper, echoing in a way I've never heard from any bird in these parts. I didn't give it too much more thought until it happened again the following week. This time, I was checking the bar screens near the influent channels, the part of the system that filters out large debris before it hits the main plant. I keep an old pair of noise-canceling headphones around my neck most nights to dull the machinery hum. I distinctly remember not wearing them that night because I wanted to be more aware of my surroundings. And sure enough, around 12:30 a.m., I hear this scream, this guttural high-pitched wail. It was so jarring that I froze in place. I even dropped my flashlight. My mind started racing. Could it be a bobcat? A mountain lion? They do occasionally roam out here, but that's more common out in western Nebraska or near the more wooded areas. I found myself walking around the perimeter fence, shining my flashlight into the pitch-black fields that sloped down toward the Platte River. I couldn't see anything. It was so dark that the beam of my flashlight just sort of dissolved into the black. But the screams kept coming every couple of minutes like a pattern. They'd start kind of low and distant, almost like a moan, then rise to this hair-raising shriek. One moment I'm thinking it's definitely a cougar or something big, but my gut feeling was that it's not quite right for that, like it had an almost human edge to it. I can't explain it better than that. In fact, I had a weird flashback to my childhood when my dad told me about the so-called spook lights people used to see out near Highway 77 in the 1970s. He said local rumors attributed them to everything from ghosts to UFOs. It's funny the things your mind dredges up in moments of heightened tension. I guess I just started thinking about all the strange stories I'd read over the years, especially the ones about weird creatures lurking in farmland or near rivers in the Midwest. I just felt vulnerable. Then it got worse. After hearing it for a couple of weeks on and off, I noticed my coworker, the same guy who initially said it was probably an owl, started changing his tune. He told me in passing one night, very quietly, like he didn't want to be overheard, that the screams seemed to follow him when he walked from the main building to the sludge digester station. He said the pitch seemed to shift as he moved, almost like it was aware of his presence. He kept telling me that he felt that something was watching him from the tree line every night. That same coworker also said he had a friend in the Nebraska National Guard who claimed they'd been dealing with unusual sightings near Offutt Air Force Base. He never elaborated much, just implied they'd seen or heard something near the perimeter fences that wasn't normal. I don't know if it's the same phenomenon, but I do wonder now looking back if these are all somehow connected. I brought my phone out one night, intending to record the sound, but as fate would have it, that was one of the nights I heard nothing. It was dead quiet, the type of quiet that makes you feel like you're inside a vacuum. Not even the normal coyote yips or the occasional train horn. And that's another odd part. Whenever these screams happen, it's like all other ambient noise just vanishes. I know that might sound insane, but it's genuinely unnerving. I hear the plant's machinery rumbling inside, but outside, it's as if the crickets and frogs are on mute. Around Thanksgiving, I started losing sleep. Even on my nights off, I'd stay awake, convinced I could hear those same wails drifting into town. I live about 10 minutes from the plant, so it shouldn't be possible to hear them that far, unless the wind was just right, or maybe it's something else. I'd step out onto my porch at 2 a.m., anxious, expecting to hear that terrible shrieking. Sometimes I did hear faint moans in the distance. Could have been the wind, or maybe I was half imagining it, but it's had me spooked. A coworker tried to lighten the mood by referencing local folklore. He was talking about the not deer sightings he'd read about on the internet. Apparently, people in Appalachia see deer-like creatures that aren't quite deer with weird proportions or human-like movements. He said that maybe Nebraska's got its own version of that, but he didn't laugh when he said it. He just kind of stared at the ground after. Maybe he was half joking, half serious. That's the kind of tension we've been under at work. On a whim, I mentioned it to my cousin who used to do volunteer search and rescue in the area. He told me about a handful of incidents from 2019 when people reported hearing unearthly screams around midnight near the Platte River. In some cases, local police were called out, but they didn't find anything. That freaked me out even more because I always assumed I'd eventually figure out it was a coyote or fox in heat or something. But if it was something that had local law enforcement stumped too, well, that's not reassuring. Anyway, right around December 15th, I'd had about all I could take. The same coworker calls me over the facility intercom and says he's seeing something tall move across the field north of the clarifiers. He's describing it like it's on two legs but hunched and it's moving fast. Again, paraphrasing. I'm thinking it's probably a trick of the shadows, maybe a deer rearing up or something. But by the time I get out there, I see nothing. No footprints, no scat, no sign of an animal, just the wide open field leading to a small patch of trees near the river. After that incident, the screams got more frequent, almost like clockwork around 12:30 or 1 in the morning. We can't keep calling the police over an unidentified noise. They already think we're nuts, and half the guys at the plant think we're pranking them. But I know what I heard. I know it wasn't normal. The best way I can describe it is a shriek that seems to come from all directions at once, like it reverberates through your bones. When you hear it, you want to run, but you also want to stand perfectly still because you're scared that movement will draw its attention. Sometimes I wonder if the sewage plant's environment has something to do with it. Like maybe the smell is attracting it if it's an animal, or if there's a subterranean structure near the plant we don't know about. One of my coworkers claims there's an old network of drainage tunnels that date back to when the city was first established. He's big into local history, and he insists that some of these older subterranean routes were never properly mapped. Could something be living down there? My rational mind says it's far-fetched, but it's not impossible. I can't pretend to know what's out there. Maybe it's an undiscovered animal or a cryptid of some sort, or maybe it's something more supernatural. I'm the last person who jumped to that conclusion, but the more I think about it, the more unsettled I get. Every time I hear that scream, it makes me question everything I've always assumed about my environment. Things like, it's just farmland, it's just the quiet plains, there's nothing but deer, coyotes, and raccoons around here. Now, I'm telling you all this partly as a form of therapy, just getting it off my chest, and partly because I'm desperate to know if anyone else in Nebraska, especially in Dodge County or near the Platte River, has experienced something similar. I've seen stories of dogman encounters out in the more wooded parts of the Midwest, and I wonder if that's what's going on. Then again, maybe it's something else entirely, something we don't even have a name for. If you guys enjoyed today's stories, be sure to smack that like and subscribe button so you don't ever miss another episode of Secrets of the Woods. I'll see you all in the next episode.